I have watched Neon Genesis Evangelion the full way through no less than 24 times. I've watched it with different groups of people, I've watched it while eating, doing dishes, cleaning my room, and doing homework. I've even watched it on the toilet. In fact, it seems like the only thing I've never done while watching Evangelion is skip the intro, and I know I'm not alone in this. Evangelion is widely considered to have one of, if not the greatest anime intro of all time. The visuals are stunning, no doubt, but I think that its staying power comes from the song that accompanies them, A Cruel Angel's Thesis. It's one of the catchiest songs, well, ever. In fact, I guarantee that you've probably heard it, even if you don't realize, because its popularity goes far beyond the show itself. It cemented itself in popular culture and meme culture alike, both at home, where people sing it at karaoke bars so often that a lot of places got requests to outright ban it, and abroad, where people are making shit like Drake and Josh Evangelion or Neon Genesis Stone Ocean. So what makes A Cruel Angel's Thesis so catchy? Well, before I begin, I'd like to say that this video was inspired in part by a criminally underrated video by the channel ANIMYZE. While we both perform a musical analysis of the piece, we each focus on different elements of the composition. In fact, it is so rich and dense with musical genius that I'm sure even a feature-length documentary wouldn't be able to cover it all. If you'd like to watch ANIMYZE's video before or after mine, I've linked it in the description below. However, I recommend watching his first because I build upon some of the points that he makes. Just please come back if you watch his first. Are you back? Great. Now let's get on with the analysis. This song has been specifically crafted to be as catchy as possible. In its pursuit of becoming an international, intergenerational earworm, A Cruel Angel's Thesis employs several techniques to really cement itself in your head. While there are several techniques at work, I personally believe that they fall into three broader categories, those being syncopation, modulation, and form. Let's look at that last one first. When I analyze a song, the first thing I like to do is lay out the form of the piece. Form is a word we use when we look at a song on a macro level as opposed to a micro level. You can think of it as a roadmap, where the locations are the sections of the song, like verse and chorus, and the root is the order in which they appear. At this point, it's important to note that an extended version of A Cruel Angel's Thesis exists and appears on official soundtracks for the series. However, for the sake of brevity, I'm looking at the condensed version from the series itself for now. Anyway, the form of A Cruel Angel's Thesis looks like this. Even just looking at the form, there are already some interesting things happening. But first, let me explain some of the terms that I'm using. Hook is a word that refers to a catchy melodic idea that repeats throughout a song in order to hook the listener, hence the name. The word hook isn't always synonymous with chorus, but in this song it is. Kind of. You see, only sometimes is the hook sung with lyrics, and other times it is played instrumentally. For this reason, I've chosen to label the times it is sung lyrically as chorus and the times it is not as hook. Now that we have that out of the way, we can begin to properly analyze the form of the piece. I think the thing that immediately stands out about the form is that the second half of the chorus repeats itself immediately after the chorus is played in full. This is a simple but effective technique that songwriters can use to make their music sound more interesting. This plays with a musical idea known as call and response, which is a fancy way of saying that one part of the song sets the next part up for success. The technique that A Cruel Angel's Thesis uses here subverts the typical approach to call and response slightly. By immediately repeating the second half of the chorus, this means that the call, the setup or builder of tension, is heard only once, but the response, the payoff, the reliever of tension, is heard twice. The listener is given all the satisfaction of hearing the climax of the chorus without having to build all the way back up to it. It's like having 2 desserts in one night, or getting that 11th chicken nugget in your order of 10. It's just a little something extra to serve as ear candy for the listener. Another effect of the chorus extension is that it draws attention away from the verse. This might sound like a bad thing, but in context I think it's genius. Think about it. The verse is the part of the song that's typically used to further the story being told. But A Cruel Angel's Thesis isn't meant to tell a story of its own. It's a theme song. Its job is to get the viewers excited to watch the show that follows, and repeating only the most cathartic part of the chorus is an incredibly effective way of building that sense of excitement. Other theme songs might play the full chorus twice, and others still might play it all only once. But the half-and-half approach of A Cruel Angel's Thesis allows it to have the best of both worlds. We've looked at the big picture of the piece, so now let's dig into the finer details. Specifically, let's take a look at the rhythm. Even more specifically, let's talk about syncopation. What is syncopation? Well, to understand syncopation, we need to have an understanding of some more fundamental concepts first. So, we've got a song, right? And that song is divided into sections, as I talked about before. Those sections are then divided into measures, also known as bars, and those bars are divided into beats. That's the level we're working on now. So, in the vast majority of songs, bars are divided into 4 beats, like so. Some of the beats have notes on them, which correspond to a sound, and other beats have rests, which correspond to a lack of sound. The patterns that form between notes and rests make up the concept of rhythm. Sometimes, rhythmic patterns become so recognizable and widespread that they're given specific names. Take, for example, the 4-on-the-floor rhythm. Named as such because 4 equally spaced notes are played on a kick drum per bar. Literally, 4 on the floor. Evenly spaced notes are often referred to as a steady rhythm or steady beat. It's rare for a melody to follow a steady beat, but it's very common to find them in percussion. Even without emphasis being placed on a particular note, if you're counting along, you probably feel some sort of pull to the 1 as you count to 4. If you don't yet, that's okay too. Hopefully you will later if you don't already. Anyway, we refer to that pull to the 1 by a beat's strength. That is to say, 1 is a strong beat, making all of the other beats weaker by comparison. We also refer to strong beats as downbeats, and weaker beats as upbeats. Now, let's make a more complex rhythm by adding a snare drum to the 2nd and 4th beats of the bar. The 2nd and 4th beats are weaker than the 1st and 3rd, but by placing emphasis on them by adding the snare, we call attention to those weaker beats, those upbeats. Now, just because we've used up all of our beats, that doesn't mean we can't keep adding more notes. Those notes just take up a fractional space of a beat. Let's add a steady 8th note rhythm on hi-hat on top of our kick and snare. It should sound more full, energetic, and lively now, because those spaces between the beats are even weaker and therefore more upbeat than the beats themselves. In fact, that liveliness is why lively music is often referred to as upbeat, because the upbeats are literally emphasized in the music. Anyway, now that we have a fundamental understanding of rhythm, we can start to talk about syncopation. It is often said among music scholars that the space between notes is just as, if not more important, than the notes themselves. And that's kind of the crux of this thing we call syncopation. Syncopation refers to how often the notes of a melody fall on the upbeats. The more upbeats and fewer downbeats, the more syncopated it is. The less regularity in the frequency of notes, the more syncopated those notes are. One of the most widespread syncopated rhythms in all of music is called the tresillo, which originated in Latin music. A tresillo is characterized by notes being emphasized in a rhythmic pattern of 3 to 3 to 2. So, if a bar has 8 beats in it, the 1st, 4th, and 7th notes would be emphasized. Sometimes there are notes between them that are simply played with less emphasis, while other times the notes just last for durations that fit into the 3 to 3 to 2 ratio. That 3-3-2 rhythm is now found all over many different genres of music, from jazz to rock to pop and everything in between. However, the tresillos found in this piece are made up of dotted and undotted 8th notes rather than quarter notes. They're found briefly in the verse, feature prominently in the hook, and make up the pre-chorus almost in its entirety. The melodic tresillos are underscored by a steady rhythm in the percussion. This creates a rhythmic contrast that is seriously unstable, which gives the music a boost of forward momentum wherever it appears. In fact, the frequency of the appearance of tresillos is directly tied to the buildup of tension throughout the piece. It appears least frequently in the chorus or hook when the tension has already been released. Frequently in the verse, where the tension begins to build, and, as I said before, the pre-chorus is almost entirely made up of tresillos, which is when the tension should be rising to a fever pitch, ready to boil over. This one simple rhythmic device is responsible for so much of the song's catchiness, and yet we've still only scratched the surface of what A Cruel Angel's Thesis has to offer. One of my wisest mentors once said, "The fundamental aspects of music are frequency, amplitude, and how they change over time." In this instance, amplitude relates to volume, which in turn relates to rhythm. On the other side of the coin, we have frequency. Frequency in music relates to pitch, which subsequently relates to the concepts of melody and harmony. Like most musical concepts, these words can mean a few different things depending on the context. Broadly, however, you can think of melody as notes appearing in sequence, and harmony as notes appearing at the same time. Melodies are typically at the forefront of the music, whereas harmonies typically lie in the background. Melody and harmony are usually built out of scales, which are particular patterns of notes. There are many different types of scales, but the most common are the major scale, which sounds like this, and the minor scale, which sounds like this. Most songs are built upon one of these scales, and the scale that serves as the foundation for a piece is called the key. Keys are denoted by writing a key signature at the beginning of the music, and most, if not all, of the notes of the song will be from the scale that makes up that key. However, to add interest, a composer may choose to borrow notes from another scale. This borrowing of notes from outside of the key is called modulation. The most well-known type of modulation is called a key change. You've probably heard of those. That being said, while all key changes are modulations, not all modulations are key changes. The primary difference being that key changes are more permanent and are denoted by writing a new key signature into the piece, whereas modulations are more momentary, denoted by accidental markings on individual notes. To find out what scales A Cruel Angel's Thesis borrows from, we must first determine what key it's in to begin with. An easy way of doing this is to look at the melody. The piece is made up of 3 repeating melodic ideas, found in the verse, pre-chorus, and hook, which also makes up the chorus. Since the hook of the song is heard first, we'll start with that. The chorus is made up of 4 phrases, each one being 2 measures long. The first and third phrases are identical, meaning that the chorus has a schema of A, B, A, C. The A phrases each begin on C, and move up a minor third followed by a major second. The B and C phrases also move up the same intervals but start on G, a perfect fifth above C. This gives us a pitch inventory of C, E flat, F, G, B flat, and a high C, which, on their own, form a pentatonic scale. It could either be C minor or E flat major, since C minor and E flat major are relative to one another, but since the melody begins and ends on C, it's most appropriate to interpret it as C minor. Since the C minor pentatonic scale is based on our standard C minor scale, it's safe to say that the piece is in the key of C minor as well. I think it's most appropriate to look at the verse next. Similar to the chorus, the verse is broken into phrases. Unlike the chorus, however, the verse is split into only 2 phrases rather than 4. Each of those phrases, though, is 8 bars long. Moreover, the first 6 bars of each phrase are identical, with only the last 2 varying. Each of these sections starts with an E flat major chord on the downbeat, followed by an E flat an octave above in the melody. That moves a perfect fourth downward, landing on the fifth of, and emphasizing the E flat major triad. Beginning this new section so strongly on E flat major suggests that we have modulated away from C minor to its relative major, E flat major. Another strong case to be made to interpret the verse as having modulated is the use of D, which appears in the melody at the very end of the first section of the verse. D is the 7th scale degree, or leading tone, in E flat major, as it wants to resolve to E flat. That leading tone comes from the 5 chord of the key. When a phrase ends on a 5 chord, it is called a half cadence, so named because it literally feels like something is missing. This half cadence, with its emphasis of the leading tone at the end of the phrase, builds a sense of intrigue that allows the verse to repeat smoothly. In terms of call and response, a half cadence is the musical equivalent of asking someone a question, only for them to respond with a question of their own. The second section of the verse ends on a pickup to the pre-chorus, walking up from C to E flat, meaning that the pre-chorus remains in E flat major. This section is made up of 2 phrases of 4 measures each. Both sections begin the same, but go off in different directions halfway through the second measure. The melody here dances around E flat on an unstable tresillo rhythm as covered before, eventually landing on B flat, which is the fifth of E flat major, meaning we haven't modulated away just yet. This is another example of setting up a repetition via half cadence, just like in the verse. The last measure of the pre-chorus, however, sets up the modulation back to C minor. It does this in a couple different ways at the same time, which in my opinion is the song's real secret weapon. It makes sense for them to go all out here, because the arrival of the final chorus is usually the climax of a given piece. First, in the harmony, the final measure of the pre-chorus ends on a G chord, which is the 5 chord in both C major and C minor. This sets up a modulation via half cadence, which is one of the most common ways that a composer may choose to modulate. The other way the song sets up this modulation is technically via another modulation. So, the chorus is in C minor. However, the approach to the chorus appears to be in C major. So what's going on? Well, there's actually 3 types of minor scales. Natural minor is the typical minor scale that we think of. There's also harmonic minor, which borrows the 7th scale degree from the minor scale's parallel major scale. That is, the scale that has the same starting pitch but the opposing quality. The effect of this is basically to keep the 5 chord of the key major, so that you can keep that satisfying leading tone resolution to the tonic. At first glance, that may appear to be what's going on here. However, there's also the melodic minor scale, which, as the name may imply, is indicated in the melody. The melodic minor scale is identical to the harmonic minor scale, except that, in addition to the 7th scale degree, it borrows the 6th scale degree from the parallel major scale as well. The effect of this is a more satisfying walk-up to the tonic. Since the approach to the chorus includes both a raised 6th and raised 7th scale degree landing on a C minor triad, we can safely make the conclusion that the piece briefly modulates to C melodic minor before landing in C natural minor. In my opinion, this melodic minor modulation is the most catchy and memorable part of the entire song, not just because of the modulation itself, but also the context in which it appears. Let's look at the rhythm in this section one last time. For one thing, listen to how the arrival of the C minor triad in the brass accompaniment is delayed by a beat, arriving on the upbeat rather than the downbeat. This in and of itself is incredibly satisfying to listen to, but let's look closer at how we got there. Did you catch that? I believe it's this very moment that makes the song as catchy and iconic as it is. From unstable rhythms to disarming modulation, the song has spent its entire duration up to this point building tension and anticipation in the listener, and this is the moment where it all pays off. It's as if the music is playing peekaboo with you. The melody rises up the C major scale on a tresillo, making you anticipate the arrival of the chorus, but right when you expect it to show up, it hides away instead, just long enough to catch your ear. But before you even have time to realize something is off, the brass jumps back in on the upbeat in the most satisfying way possible. This moment is hype incarnate, and in my opinion is what truly cements A Cruel Angel's Thesis as one of, if not the greatest anime opening of all time. From the simple tricks in how it's laid out, to the implementation of complex rhythmic structures, and the masterfully composed harmony featuring several types of modulation, A Cruel Angel's Thesis is a tour de force of musical genius. Not only has it transcended physical borders to become an international phenomenon, but it has also transcended time as well, remaining relevant nearly 30 years after it first hit the airwaves. For all these reasons and more, I truly believe it deserves a place among the greats, not only of anime music or J-pop, but of pop music in general. If you've made it this far, thank you. This video is a culmination of literal years of work, as it's an expanded version of a project I did during my freshman year of college. I've learned a lot since then, but I'm sure there's still plenty that I don't know, so if I missed anything or you have something to add, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Once again, this video is partially inspired by a video on the channel ANIMYZE, which I've linked in the description. If you chose not to watch their video when I mentioned it earlier, it's still definitely worth watching even after mine, as I chose to focus on different aspects of the composition than he covered over there. And, if you have further insight into the piece and end up doing your own analysis, link it in the comments and I'll be sure to check it out. Finally, if you liked this video and would like to see more like it, consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons below, and maybe even share it with a friend. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time.